Hello, everybody. Welcome back to the top topics of November 8, 2021. Let us look at the topics that I will be discussing with you today. Two oral drugs and treatment for COVID 19 now have come up and have got a regulatory clearance. Prime Minister's climate promises and how far India is on a track to meet them. We shall see this in an editorial that has been given in the Indian Express. Now, this will help you to write a good answer for the Panchamrit that the government has launched at the COP26 and how far India can achieve the goals of Panchamrit. What links food and oil prices is an editorial in the Indian Express that has been given, and it shows how the food and oil prices are linked and how we see a increase in the food prices with the related increase in the crude oil prices, especially which we have been experiencing now with relation to the retail prices of certain food articles, apart from fertilizers and also edible oils that has been in news. Fuel price optics is an editorial in the Hindu. Another editorial is the new jurisprudence for political prisoners. It is given in the Hindu, and this is related to the recent case of Twaha versus Union of India, in which the Supreme Court uses its interpretation to protect the rights and liberties of two students who have been charged on terrorist charges under the Unlawful Activities Prevention Act and provides them bail. A civil disobedience campaign begins in Sudan, and Haryana law on hiring causes a concern among the industrial bodies because it is providing 75% reservation in all the jobs up to 30,000 rupees for the local residents of the state. Moving on, two new oral drugs and treatment for COVID 19. Now, several drugs have been a part of the COVID treatment protocols, we all know, during the pandemic, but no orally administered drug had got a regulatory clearance in the country until now. Now, two new oral drugs named Molnupiravir and Paxlovid. The UK drug regulator announced that it has approved the first oral antiviral treatment for COVID 19. Now, the drug Molnupiravir has been developed by Merck and Ridgeback, and it is used in people who have a very mild to moderate COVID 19 symptom and at least one risk factor for developing severe illness. Pfizer has announced the trials of another oral antiviral drug candidate, Paxlovid, and it is significantly reducing hospitalization and death. So, what is the significance of this development? Several drugs have been a part of the treatment protocols, but no orally administered drug has got a regulatory clearance in the country until Molnupiravir. The trials were also conducted on remdesivir, hydroxychloroquine, ritonavir, and lopinavir, even interferon beta 1A. Eventually, the WHO concluded that the four repurposed drugs have little or no effect on the hospitalization of COVID 19 persons. Now, the UK clearance to Molnupiravir and the promise shown by Pfizer drug would pave the way for more effective management of COVID 19. So, Molnupiravir is developed actually to treat influenza. It has now been repurposed to treat COVID patients. It interferes with the replication of the SARS-CoV-2 virus that causes COVID-19 and thereby reduces the severity of the disease. It is most effective when used early. Similarly, Paxlovid also is a drug that it is a protease inhibitor antiviral therapy. It inhibits the viral replication at proteolysis, a stage that occurs before the viral replication. It is designed to be administered orally so that it can be prescribed at the first sign of infection or first awareness exposure and help the patients avoid severe illness. The next is that Pradhan Mantri promises and how far India is on a track to achieve them. Now, Prime Minister had raised India's existing climate targets and also announced a few targets that were new and not included in the NDCs of India. First is net zero, that is achieving net zero status by 2070. This mostly India has adopted because of the international pressure that was coming a long way. Now, the writer says that there is a plenty of time to achieve this roadmap, and the other four targets have to be achieved in a more immediate time frame 2030. So let's look at how far India can achieve these other four targets of 2030. The net zero emission target, let me tell you, by 2070 will be dependent on the targets to be achieved by 2030. So the 2030 targets will be a basis for achieving the net zero emissions by 2070. The emissions intensity and the renewable energy. Now, the two targets of reducing emission intensity and increasing the renewable mix in installed electric capacity are already a part of India's NDC that India has been submitted in 2015 as a part of Paris Agreement. In that NDC, India had promised to reduce its emission intensity or the emissions per GDP by 33 to 35% from 2005 levels by 2030, and to ensure 40% of the installed electricity capacity in 2030 will come from non-fossil fuel-based energies, that is like solar, wind, etc. Now, these targets have been enhanced. Emissions intensity reduction is targeted to 45% from 33 to 35%, and share of renewable energy in the installed electricity capacity has been increased to 50% from the present 40%. India is already on the course to achieve these targets well before 2030 deadline. The emission intensity according to the recent report was 24% below 2005 levels in 2016 itself. A 33 to 35% reduction is expected to achieve within the next 2 years. Therefore, 45% reduction is not expected to pose a very big challenge and is easily achievable. The case of renewable energy installed capacity is not very different. By November 2020, the share of renewables like large hydropower to the total installed electric capacity has already crossed 36%, and the share of non-fossil fuel energy was over 38%. Now, most of the new capacity additions are happening in renewable space, and therefore taking this to 50% is not very difficult. Forest cover is, however, a cause of concern. The third promise made in India's NDC about forest cover increase does not find mention in Pradhan Mantri Modi's speech, and that is the only target that India is struggling to achieve. The NDC has promised to create an additional carbon sink of 2.5 to 3 billion tons of carbon dioxide equivalent through forest and tree cover by 2030. Although the forest cover has been growing, according to the official statistics, the pace of growth is not being commensurate with what is required to meet the target. Let us look at the non-fossil fuel. The other two announcements about installed capacity of renewable energy and the absolute reduction of 1 billion tons by 2030 are not part of India's existing commitments, but they are linked. India had initially set a target of 20 gigawatt of solar power in 2020. This was raised to 100 gigawatt by 2022. And the targets of wind and biomass along with solar were added, now making it 175 by 2022. Recently, Prime Minister Modi enhanced it to 450 gigawatt by 2030. However, let me remind you that none of this is a part of the NDC that was announced. Now, in Glasgow, Pradhan Mantri Modi said that he will achieve a 500 gigawatt of non-fossil fuel-based energy by 2030. Non-fossil fuels includes not just renewables such as solar and wind, but also nuclear and hydro. And therefore, taking all these into consideration, which make up about 50 gigawatt right now, achieving the 450 gigawatt target for renewable energy would automatically achieve the target for 500 gigawatt very easily. So this is also not a challenge. Also, the writer says that the nuclear energy is being significantly ramped up. The installed nuclear power capacity is set to increase to 22 gigawatt by 2021 from the current 7 gigawatt. So achieving a non-fossil fuel to the installed energy capacity is not going to be a difficult task for India. Absolute emissions. Now, the final and the fifth target was announced was unexpected. However, Prime Minister said that India ensures to reduce 1 billion tons from the projected emissions between now, that is 2021 and 2030. This is for the first time that India is talked about making reduction in absolute emissions. All previous formulations used to be in terms of emission intensity, that is, emissions per unit of GDP. Now, the 1 billion ton reduction promise and emission intensity target, which I've read in the beginning, seem to be linked. It seeks to ensure that while India's GDP as well as emissions will grow, the rate of growth of emissions would be slower than the GDP. So, more GDP is created for the same amount of emissions. Now, achieving the emission intensity would mean that India would be emitting far less than business as usual scenario, and it is possible that it may even exceed 1 billion tons. Therefore, the promise to reduce 1 billion tons of emissions would be another way of reiterating the emission intensity target and is very much achievable. So, apart from the forest cover, the other four targets of Panchamrit are easily achievable by India. What India needs to work on is on fast tracking the investments in renewable power sector and also increasing the green cover of the country. Now, what links food and oil prices, says another editorial. The news has been that the last week, the United Nations Food and Agriculture Organization showed its data for World Food Price Index averaging 133.2 points in October, and this is said to be a 10-year high. The FPI has oscillated since the outbreak of COVID 19. In May 2020, when the global economy was in doldrums, the price index had collapsed to a 4-year low of 91.9. So let us see what is the link between the food and fuel prices. As we know that the cost push and the demand pull inflation, the acts on inflation, and so the costs which push up the prices of the commodities lead to inflation, they being the various inputs, one being energy. Now, one reason why petroleum and agri commodity prices move in tandem is the biofuel link. When crude prices rise, blending of ethanol from sugarcane and corn with petrol or diverting the palm and soya bean for biodiesel production becomes much more attractive, and likewise the price of soya bean and corn increases. Cotton becomes more affordable vis-a-vis the petrochemical based synthetics fibers because these are dependent on the petrochemicals. Also, since corn is an animal feed, its diversion to ethanol leads to substitution by other grains, and therefore the grain prices increases, including for wheat. Thus, this pushes up the food grain prices. So, the recent rise in the food grain prices, are they having any impact of the farmer? Let us see. To some extent, yes, the writer says, because the market prices are well higher than the MSP, and gives examples of the prices of raw cotton in the Gujarat market, which is about 7,500 to 8,000 quintal, and higher than the government's MSP of 6,000. So the farmers are getting a higher price in the markets. Soya bean similarly has been selling for high against the MSP of 3,900 and the market price is 5,000. But on the losing side, the farmers are being forced to pay more on the fuel and fertilizers. So whatever money the farmer is gaining on the market prices, he is losing to fuel and fertilizers because their prices have been increasing. Also, diesel prices have been increased, and it is an input for all the tractors that are used by the farmers. Together with fertilizers such as diammonium phosphate and muriate of potash, the prices of others intermediates and raw materials also have skyrocketed due to the combination of demand pull and cost pull factors, such as higher crop plantings in demand pull situation and from high oil and gas prices, that is the cost push situation. The writer says that the coming weeks will also present a challenging situation to the government to make the fertilizers available in reasonable quantities at affordable prices because now is the season of rabi cropping. And that would matter for food prices as well, because as the input rises for the farmers, the food prices get costlier for the consumers. Therefore, the writer says that the central banks, including India, should take the proper steps to reduce the inflation and also call on the states to reduce the tax along with the central government to reduce the excise duties on petrol and diesel. A similar editorial in the Hindu speaks about the context of how the center reduced the excise duty for petrol, diesel, and asked the states to cut in VAT. The writer says the levies must be further cut to offset the effect of continuing surge in global oil prices. So the center had recently cut the excise duty on VAT and on diesel and petrol, and this made the retail prices cheaper. Government has been urging the states and union territories to reduce the VAT levied on the fuel, thereby enhancing the relief provided to the consumers. So, apart from the decision to revive the economy, the writer says that the present reduction in the taxes, the government also is keeping in mind the coming elections, because price or affordability of the goods and services is an important election factor which determines the win of any political party, I would say. As far as the economy is concerned, reduction in fuel bills is bound to have a salutary impact on inflation, as diesel is the main fuel for freight carriage and impacts the cost of everything, and therefore impacts the cost of goods and services that are transported. However, the step of reduction of excise duty and VATs and related retail prices will depend on how the global prices now behave in the coming weeks, as there is a prediction by the World Bank Group that the global prices are sought to increase. And keeping this in mind, the writer calls for the center and the states to further reduce the taxes that they are imposing on the fuels so that the consumers do not have to shell out more money for the goods and services, and also it does not have effects on inflation, especially when the economy is growing after the pandemic. In the end, the writer gives examples of Tamil Nadu and Punjab, who reduced the prices at outlets by taking into consideration the affordability and the inflation rather than not sticking to their taxes for political or revenue reasons. The next editorial is about the new jurisprudence for political prisoners. Now, this is about the Twaha versus Union of India case. The writer says how judicial radicalism by the court became a emancipatory tool for the accused who have been charged on narrow interpretation of the law. Presently, the Unlawful Activities Prevention Act that is used to deal with terroristic activities in the country, and it is called as a draconian law because usually the persons do not get a bail under this law, and is also used for preventive detention. Though sometimes the persons are also denied bail based on the lack of understanding of the law, said the Supreme Court. The writer highlights the misuse of this draconian law and appreciates the judgment of Supreme Court on October 28, 2021, saying that it has immense potential to reclaim the idea of personal liberty and human dignity by correctly interpreting the provisions of law. The case is called Twaha Faisal versus Union of India. The writer highlights the curious trajectory of the case also, from the trial court to the High Court and finally to the Supreme Court. The court deconstructed the provisions of the UAPA to protect the liberty and human dignity. This is not the first time that the court is interpreting the provisions in the light to protect the rights and liberties of persons, not only under the UAPA law but also various cases have been slapped on various persons for the accusations or criticisms, terming them to be seditious acts, and therefore the Supreme Court has intervened and called on the government to have a liberal to have a proper definition of the seditious act, and also to define what causes what terms to be seditious, and it has protected the rights and liberties of various persons. In this case, three college students have been charged under the draconian law for possessing material related to the banned organization, that is CPIM Maoist, even without the allegations of any act of violence. So, just based on the possession of this material, they were charged of terrorism under the UAPA law. According to the accused, the charges were an attempt to label them as terrorists based on intellectual and ideological inclinations attributed to them. The trial judge granted the students bail. One was absconding, and the two are Twaha, and the other one is Alan. So they were accused in 2020, and by that time they had spent about 10 months in jail. The High Court when the case went to the High Court, it set aside the bail of Twaha and granted bail to Alan. When the case came to Supreme Court, he upheld the trial judge finding that the materials do not show any intention on the part of both the accused to further the activities of the terrorist organization and found fault with the case of High Court. The Supreme Court confirmed the bail granted to the students and now they are free. So the case is based on radical literature material that is retrieved from the persons. They had books, leaflets of the CPI Maoist. The following sections were imposed on them by the NIA. Section 38 and 39 of the Unlawful Activities Act, 120B of the IPC. Now 38 deals with offence relating to membership of terrorist organization. 39 deals with offence relating to support given to terrorist organization. 120B of IPC is a penal provision on criminal conspiracy, and 13 of UAPA was alleged, which is a provision about punishment for unlawful activities. The recent ruling of the SC by providing bail to the students is important because the Supreme Court was emphatic and liberal when it said that mere association with a terrorist organization is not sufficient to attract the offences alleged under the UAPA, unless and until the association and the support is with the intention of furthering the activities of the terrorist organization. Offences under section 38 and 39 is not made out, said the court. Mere possession of documents or books by the accused at a formative young age and even their fascination for an ideology does not make out for an offence, and therefore based on this the Supreme Court had granted them bail and now they are free. The Supreme Court very nicely brought out the difference between active membership of furthering the activities of a terrorist organization and passive membership, merely just possessing material or books of any banned organization. The Supreme Court brought out the correct meaning of the term association, saying that association will mean when a person furthers the activities of the banned terrorist organization. The Supreme Court also mitigated an error committed by the High Court by itself, that is the Supreme Court, in a Zahoor Ahmad Watali case, where the bail plea is to be processed based on a very narrow interpretation of the UAPA. Let us look at about what the bail plea says. Now, there is something called as presumption of innocence. According to this, a convict or an accused has the right to be presumed innocent until and unless proven guilty. And this is the central tenet of our criminal justice system. However, instead of presumption of innocence, the UAPA is based on presumption of guilt of the accused. That is, the accused is presumed to be guilty of the crime unless he is proved innocent. And section 43 of the Act says that jail is the rule and bail is not even an exemption. Therefore, getting bail under this presumption of guilty under the UPA Act becomes very difficult for the persons who have been charged of crimes under this Act. The Supreme Court tried to mitigate the error committed by the Supreme Court itself in Zahoor Ahmad Watali by interpreting the same bail plea provision. In the Watali case, the court said that by virtue of section 43D of the UAPA, the burden is on the accused to show that the prosecution case is not true. That is, the burden is on the accused to prove that he is innocent. Now, the proposition in Vatali is that the bail court should not investigate into the materials and evidence, and the bail plea should be based only on the nature of allegations, because the court said that 43D section prohibits a thorough and deeper examination. As such, because of this provision of prohibiting deeper examination of materials, several cases the bail pleas have been rejected merely relying on the Zahur Ahmad Vatali case, despite there being strong indications that the evidence itself was false or fabricated, and this led to violation of human rights. The court this time relied on a judgment of K.A. Najib in 2021, that is Union of India versus K.A. Najib. In K.A. Najib, the larger bench said that even the stringent provisions under Section 43D do not curtail the power of Constitutional Court to grant bail on the ground of violation of fundamental rights. Therefore, if the court feels that there is a violation of fundamental rights, it can grant bail, not just relying on the allegations or on the arguments of the prosecution, unlike the above. In the Twaha Fazal judgment case, the writer says that the method that was adopted by Delhi High Court in the Delhi Rights case was taken up by the Supreme Court. In the Delhi Rights case, the Delhi High Court observed that the government had forgot a line between constitutionally guaranteed right of protest and terrorist activity, because in that case the students were charged of terrorist activity for merely participating in a protest, and therefore the Delhi High Court in the Delhi Rights case had granted bail to the students. It said that the state is taking a very wide and even somewhat vague meaning of terrorist action under Section 15 of the UAPA, and this was condemnable. Therefore, the Supreme Court ventured to examine the charge of the content of the charge instead of just relying on the prosecution's allegations. In this, the judicial radicalism therefore builds as the emancipatory legal tool, and the judgment should be invoked to release the political prisoners in the country who have been denied bail due to either harshness of law or due to the follies of understanding the law, or both, says the writer. So once again, the Supreme Court has proved that it is a protector of fundamental rights of the citizens even while interpreting the laws. The next news is civil disobedience campaign by Sudan. The pro-democracy groups now have organized a civil disobedience movement against a military coup. The protests were organized by the Sudanese Professional Association, which is an umbrella of trade bodies, which has been instrumental in protest against Omar Bashir, who head the government in Sudan. Now the military has taken over the government, and these groups are protesting against the military coup. The international community has also accelerated mediation efforts to find out a way for the crisis, which threatens to destabilize the already restive Horn of Africa. So apart from Sudan, we had seen that there is problem even in Ethiopia yesterday. The world powers have cut aid and called for imposing civil rule in Sudan. There have been multiple efforts of mediation, of political settlement, but with no signs of breakthrough. The other news is about a variant by the Indian SARS-CoV Genomics Consortium. Now this variant is called as AY4.2 variant and is less than 0.1% of all the variants of concern and variants of interest. Now this has been given in a weekly bulletin of the Indian SARS-CoV Genomics Consortium. This is a consortium of 28 national laboratories to monitor the genomic variations in SARS-CoV, the COVID-19 causing virus. The Pan-India network functions under the Union Health Ministry. Now, variants of interest are those which may result in these variants are called as variants of interest, as they result in reduced efficacy of treatments and they potentially increase in transmissibility or higher severity of the disease. These variants of interest may be blamed for increase in number of regional cases or unique outbreaks. Variants of concern have the same attributes of variants of interest but are also responsible for greater disease severity. They are also responsible for increase in hospitalization and deaths. A significant drop in the antibody response from previous infection and also reduced effectiveness of treatment of vaccines. So therefore, this AY 4.2 is not a variant of concern or variant of interest as of now, says the Indian SARS-CoV Genomics Consortium. The last and the final news is about Haryana law on hiring causes concern among the industry bodies. Now, the Haryana government has enacted a law which mandates up to 75% of job reservation in the locals for private sector. The quota will apply for jobs that offer a monthly salary of up to 30,000. The draft bill add a ceiling of reservation for 50,000, but this grew bitter criticism from the industry bodies. It is called as the Haryana State Employment of Local Candidates Bill, and it was passed by the Assembly in November. It will come into force in January 2022. The law contains a clause that companies will invoke if suitable candidates cannot be found. In such cases, they may hire from outside so long as they inform the government of such a step, pointing that a large number of migrants are competing for the low paid jobs and subsequently this is impacting the local infrastructure and housing and also proliferation of slums. The Haryana government has said that such preferences to local candidates will be socially, economically and environmentally desirable. The law also appoints a designated officer to act as a representative of the government who will rule on the companies invoking the clause, citing any lack of suitable candidates. According to this law, this officer, which is the designated officer, may overrule the exemption claim by directing the company to train the local candidates to achieve the desired skill and qualification so that they can get into the job. There have been concerns as the law could trigger an exodus of large domestic and multinational investors across sectors such as auto, IT that rely on highly skilled manpower, says the industry bodies. Now, this law requires firms with 10 or more employees to reserve 75% of the jobs offering a salary of less than 30,000 a month to the candidates of state domicile. The move is to regulate the hiring of those people, especially the disallowing the influx of talent from other parts of the country in sectors such as IT and IT enabled service. States such as Andhra Pradesh has also brought in a law which provides for local reservation in private governments. However, even that move was criticized because there may be the availability of the skilled candidates which the company is looking for, or they might not be the relative availability. Also, the law which provides that if the person is not available, then the company has to take the responsibility to train the person in required skills. The industry body says that this will add to the cost of the company and also delay that is going to affect the operations of the company. So this brings me to the end of the important topics for the day. I shall meet you tomorrow with another list of important topics. Until then, bye bye.